Good evening, everyone. We appreciate you being here for our second workshop on density reduction groundwater resource. Before we get started, I just wanted to make one quick announcement. In the audience this evening, we have Deputy Mayor Stephen McIntosh, Councilman Bill Lockhart, Councilwoman Janet Martin, Councilman Stephen Salaka. For your information, this is a very important topic to them, but they will be unable to make any public comments at this time in regulation of the sunshine laws. They will reserve their comments for the September 18th City Council meeting, which will be here at 9 a.m., which will be the next presentation that we have on the DRGR. We are still making some more copies of the agenda, so in the rear table next to Antonio, if you would raise your hand, Antonio, wave. More agendas will be coming, and we'll keep printing them and try to pass those out to you. There is also a sign-in sheet that is being passed along through the audience. If you could please take the opportunity to sign in there as well. At this time, I'm going to turn over the workshop to our consultants, after which we'll have a question and answer period. We do ask that we will be passing a microphone along to each of you, that you please speak clearly into the microphone and state your name. We are broadcasting live on our government access channel, TV 98, and we will be rebroadcasting this so other folks have the opportunity to watch it as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carl. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for coming tonight to the second workshop on the DRGR. How's that? Okay, thank you. When we talk about DRGR, we're talking about the Northeast Quadrant Land Use Plan, which is really limited to 3,586 acres. So in beginning, I'd like to present our team. Again, my name is Carl Baracco. I'm a professional engineer, and I'm president of Baracco & Associates. Our planner is Greg Stewart, principal planner with Stewart & Associates. Transportation planner and engineer is Jim Banks with JMB Transportation Engineering. And our environmental consultant is Mike Myers with Passerelle & Associates. First, we want to do a brief introduction, and I will tell you there is a lot to cover, so please bear with me. I'm going to try to get it through quickly so that we do have adequate time for questions and answers. But when we started this project, we really had an assignment to evaluate what we're going to call the program area, the 3,586 acres that I mentioned. And the first thing we noted is that there really are three options. One is status quo, do nothing. The second option, which we really learned at the first workshop, which is consider restoration. And the third is an increase in density in that area. Now, our assignment is based upon collection, review, and analysis of existing data, science and engineering data, land use and traffic data, and public policy. That was the existing information that we based this on. In addition to that, when we got into it, we really wanted to get a little bit more information, so Jim went out and did some traffic counts, and we did some more land use collection, which I'll share with you in just a moment. The key resources that we used are listed on the screen, and as we go, the screen is up here. I don't know if all of you can see it. It's to your left. Those are the resources. They're listed in our report, which is online for your review, and I would like to mention right now, if anyone has any data that we have not referenced in the report, I would be happy to review it, and my business cards will be up here at the end of the meeting, so please feel free. If you have new data that you don't see was addressed in the report, please contact me, and we will certainly have a few days to review that and include that. In considering our analysis, we looked at several different components. First, transportation, land use, conservation and habitat, drainage, surface water management, and utilities. The first is the transportation, which we'll cover, and this first slide is the new data. Jim went out and collected traffic counts on Terry Street and Bonita Grand in order to validate his model and evaluating future traffic demands. We did that because we wanted to look at what impacts each of three different scenarios that we would consider would have on the transportation network. So that was one small group of new data that we did analyze. In way of background for transportation, and I don't want anybody to get overly concerned with this because a lot of this is on paper, But East Terry Street, right now, based upon adopted standards, is at a very, very low level of service. As you can see driving out there now, it's not significant, but it is something to be aware of. And as additional traffic is added to those corridors, there are intersection improvements which will quickly increase capacity and keep those long-term improvements at bay for several years. But in accordance with the long-range transportation plan, at some time in the future, long-range plan out in the future, it requires the four-laning of Benita Grand Drive and East Terry Street, whether or not anything is done in the area that we're discussing. And again, that four-laning would be required regardless of any change in land use in the area that we're considering. So Jim studied 3 different scenarios. One is 5,000 units in that area, one 7,500, and one 10,000 unit scenario. The 5,000 unit scenario would require a new north-south 2-lane local street parallel to Morton with that number of units. The next one analyzed was 7,500, and by the way, those numbers do include units that are out there and units that could be built out there today. So when I say 5,000, 7,500, 10,000, that is in total. And the 7,500 unit build-out would require, in addition to those that I just mentioned, east-west 2-lane road between Benita Grand Drive and Morton. So with any increased density, with those parameters of density increases, additional roadways would be required, and that density would be expected to pay for those. Next is the land use breakdown, and again, this is new data, and the transportation data and the land use data was really the only new data that we analyzed. And Greg put together really the first comprehensive parcel-by-parcel land use database for this area, and it's based upon the 2012 Lee County Property Appraisers GIS information site. That matrix that he put together includes strap numbers, ownership, land use type, dwelling units, and improvements. And that was put together so that we could have an accurate, objective, and quantitative evaluation of the area that we're looking at. A little bit more background on the northeast quadrant land uses. The study area, which is the program area plus a little bit area south of that area, which would be impacted, is currently at 0.4 units per acre. And the program area, the actual area we're talking about, is currently at 0.5 units per acre. The study area at build-out, in other words, what's there today and what could be built there without any changes, would be at a density of 0.56 units per acre, and those are just some facts to keep in mind. In addition to in those areas, over 3,400 acres of the study area are developed and are significantly altered. They include residential utility uses, mining, and agriculture. And those uses, I think you'll see, are important in our analysis as we go in the future. Public conservation lands are at 1,055 acres. And the last bit of information, and this is pure planning information, is if you look at the information on the screen, basically what that means is that in the year 2035, as projected in the city's evaluation and appraisal report, the EAR report, says that in the year 2035 there will be a net, what word am I trying to use? We will be 405 acres in deficit need of residential uses based upon population growth in the EAR. With regard to conservation and habitat, approximately 75% of the area is forest and wetland and are already in public conservation resource protection. Existing high-quality habitat exists on the perimeter of the area, and as we enter this, you'll see those areas would not see any change regardless of whatever plan is undertaken. And finally, the balance of the area is agriculture, and it's mostly in production and irrigated at this time. As I said, 71% of the study area is altered by residential, mining, utilities, and agriculture. And if you looked at an aerial photograph, you'd see that this area in particular is really different in context than the balance of the DRGR area that we have mapped. And finally, when we look at a comprehensive program for restoration, it really is limited due to fragmented ownership and the degree the land has been altered and economics. The next item we'll talk about is groundwater recharge, and there is a lot of data to look at, and you can get lost in the data. There's so much. So we tried to give you the sources, but in essence, when you look at the studies, the study area does not meet the definition and function of DRGR as it was originally defined, and that is provided in several different studies. Another study shows that 69.5 of the raw water source is from the lower mid-Hawthorne aquifer, and the balance, 30.5, is from the lower Tamiami aquifer. And those aquifers are below a confining layer in the soil, which really prohibits any significant seepage from surface water down into those aquifers. So regardless of whatever we would go, the data shows that the raw water source is protected and really won't be affected by anything we're doing in this plan. In addition, there are several lower West Coast water supply reports, and in those reports it's stated that Bonita Springs is designated as an area of substantial or abnormally high recharge for. No area of Bonita Springs is designated as an area of substantial or abnormal high recharge for any of those three potable water wells, and that supports the thing that I just went over. The water resources, the raw water, is protected. The next bullet just talks about the confining layer that I mentioned, and finally the last bullet really just shows that the area is disturbed in many significant ways. The next area, and I think this is probably most important to most of you, is drainage. And I want to repeat something that I said at the first workshop. We know that flooding is an issue in this area. I think I told you the first time, I don't see anything that's going to be done here, any way to improve the conditions out there in terms of a flood event. As a matter of fact, there was an article in the paper, the South Florida Water Management District has a consultant, I think he opined that there really is no financially feasible way to significantly improve the flooding conditions in that area. So we did look at that, concluded that there really was no way to improve them, and as you'll see as we go through here, we thought that if anything is done, the best thing that could be offered is a way to maintain the existing outfalls for that water. And that idea came to me because in '95, when there was significant flooding, the first thing that was done was to clean and snag the Imperial River, and which was a significant improvement to the floodwater. So if we can't do anything to improve the situation, let's make sure that we do everything we can to not let it get worse. And that's really what we based this on. So in the study area, there are numerous surface water environmental flood protections deficiency. That's existing today. In the area today, the 25-year storm event, which is a typical design storm event, is not accommodated, and there are no modern surface water management systems existing in that area today. The pollutant discharges are significant based upon existing land uses. When we look at discharge data for runoff, pollutants coming from agricultural land are very high, and from residential land without a water management treatment system are very high. So in the current state, the water quality leaving that area is not very high, and there's a lot we can do with that. And then finally, in that area, there really isn't a lot of revenue generated to significantly contribute to the maintenance of those outfalls that I talked about. And these are conditions that we have today out there. Increasing the density in the area wouldn't shift stormwater that normally stands in that area into other properties. And the reason for that are several. First, new development is required to accommodate at a minimum a 25-year storm event. That's something that is not existing in that area today. Second, new development is required to attenuate or hold their discharges back on site and not discharge any more water after development as compared to water leaving the site prior to development. So that's another requirement that would be imposed on any development in the area. Thirdly, any new development would have to look at their outfalls to get to the eventual outfall. So they would be looking at maintaining existing flows, existing ditches, and making sure that those stay intact or are accommodated in any design. And finally, and I think this is most important to me as an engineer, the state has rules, our South Florida Water Management District has rules. One of those rules is a compensating storage rule, which basically is that if you go in and you develop a piece of property and you will be taking storage out from a major event, you have to compensate in some way to replace that so as not to worsen anyone's situation. So regardless of what we do here, really any project done in South Florida has to abide by those rules. They're there for a reason. They're there to safeguard all of us. Uh-oh. Okay, we have a little error on the screen. But I'll try to go through it because we're running out of time. And this is actually really straightforward, I think, and that is regard to water quality. As I told you before, the existing uses in the area really aggravate water quality, and there's no contribution existing to improvements. The city of Bonita Springs is mandated now to remove 9,903 pounds per year of nitrogen. That's a tough row to hoe. That's a lot of nitrogen to remove. If the proposed new water quality improvements are put in place that we're proposing, they would remove nitrogen and phosphorus in addition to what they're receiving, so there would be a total net gain. And that's one additional incentive that we knew we had to put in there because we know we have to address water quality. So not only do we get those existing uses that are not treated discharging off-site, we have an improvement. I think there's a big opportunity for water quality improvement. The next item is central water and sanitary sewer. I've had several discussions with staff at Bonita Springs Utilities. While they have no formal plans to serve this area because it is currently DRGR, the engineer that I talked to did have some ideas in their head. They can provide service if there is a change to this area, which again is a huge benefit, as we'll talk about more in the future, because as I said, there are more units that could be built out there today. If they're built out there today, the majority of them would be on septic tanks. There are already septic tanks out there. If this plan goes forward, eventually the entire area would be served by central water and sewer, which would be a huge environmental benefit. And then finally, actually that number is right here, 752 new units, and those are the units that could be built out there today based upon existing entitlements. Can you still hear me in the back? I tend to walk away. Okay. So in our evaluation, we really wanted to put something together that we thought would present these ideas in a form that could be considered. You have to keep in mind they're qualitative, they're not quantitative, and everybody's going to have a little bit different opinion as we go through these, but we classified them in 3 different groups. The first is quality of life considerations, the second is infrastructure, and the third, economics. And you'll see the way these are put together. The first that we're going to look at is quality of life, and they include things like water quality, population accommodation, functional habitat, parks and trails, planned development, non-conforming uses in open space, and that's the group of things that we put together that we really feel have an effect on quality of life. And as we go through each matrix, we looked at how does that bode for status quo, for restoration, and increased densities. Well, with quality of life considerations, status quo offers good habitat, trails, and open space, but very poor water quality, as I've discussed already, and really poor land use consideration. And that is, if nothing is done, there are still going to be units built in there. Where are they going to be built? How are they going to be built? Well, that's dependent upon each property owner. There's really no significant planning that's going to go forward in the status quo in this area, but it will go forward with development. The restoration offers excellent habitat, parks and trails, and open space, and good water quality. Restoration is a great thing. I think we wish we could all do it, but I think as you'll see, and as I'll mention earlier, it's really a financially burdensome option. And increasing density offers good to excellent water quality, habitat and parks and trails, in addition to other things. I'm just trying to summarize these things for you. And again, these are in our report that you can take some time to look at if you'd like. The next is infrastructure considerations. Status quo offers good water table recharge, and that's superficial water. That's not raw water that we're talking about. That's water on top of that confining layer. Poor drainage and poor utilities in the status quo option. Restoration offers very good superficial water and drainage considerations. Again, if we could do the restoration, I think that's something we'd all like to do. And finally, an increase in densities offers very good superficial water storage, drainage, and very good utilities and transportation efficiencies. And finally, the economic considerations. The status quo is really a real poor economic generator because the land is really not used efficiently. Restoration, I think we'd have to classify as very poor. It's not going to be generating any revenues. It would be taken off the tax rolls, and it would be significantly expensive to acquire and restore that area. And finally, increased densities offers good to excellent conservation and funding incentives and municipal economic benefits. So, in coming to our recommendations and conclusions, I think it's pretty clear to see where we're going. Red's going to come up and he's going to go through the recommendations briefly, and then I will conclude our presentation.
Thank you, Carl. Our recommendations from the report, and I'm sure that everyone's read the report. If not, after this presentation, we can give you the website and you can download it. But the findings are that the DRGR land use category is inconsistent with site conditions, uses, subsurface geology, and the public policy that forms the basis for DRGR. We're recommending the following. First, to amend the land use map to reflect existing conditions on the ground. Our analysis shows 528 acres plus or minus should be classified for medium density residential, 66 acres for moderate density residential, and 152 acres for low density residential. And again, these are the subdivisions that are already there. We're also recommending approximately 395 acres for public and semi-public land uses. That would include utilities, the school sites, that type of thing. We also recommend for 2,159 acres a new land use, the Imperial Community District. That's at 3 units per acre with a half a unit per acre incentive bonus density to do above and beyond environmental site planning, TDUs, that type of thing. The third recommendation, again relating to the future land use map, is to plug in 3 new neighborhood mixed-use overlay areas and 1 core business mixed-use overlay areas. The concept behind that is smart growth. You know, you want mixed uses if you're going to develop for all kinds of reasons. Also, to include 3 greenway resource protection overlays. These areas will create large-scale ecological open space corridors from the subdivisions to the rural areas to the DRGR areas. We're also recommending 2 new funding sources because it's clear that any type of development needs to pay for itself, and given the large-scale environmental deficiencies, there needs to be money pumped into this area. So first, we're recommending a municipal service unit fee for the Imperial District only, and that's at $5,000 per unit. So in other words, any density over 1 unit per 10, the property owner is going to have to pay. The second, well, it's not in order, but the second funding source would be an MSTU, a municipal service taxing unit, solely focused on drainage maintenance and long-term drainage improvements. We're also recommending on the map to correct the existing rural estate land use category. Currently, it's, in general terms, it's 1 unit per 3 acres. This area is platted at one unit per 3, 1 unit per 1 unit per 5. So we are recommending, again, get the map straight. If anything else, at least make the corrective amendments and create 3 subclass, well, 2 new subclassifications of rural estate. Again, the MSTU. In terms of development, we are also recommending, if a land use map amendment goes forward, to parallel that with your land development code amendments, to incorporate new low impact design standards, to finally implement best management practices that are in the comprehensive plan, but to codify them, and also create new rules and regulations based on dark skies and Florida Yard principles. A key regulation is to amend the land development code to adopt a water quality improvement standard. Carl can speak to this, but the current way of going about it is you can't further impair. You've got to maintain status quo. Our recommendation is that doesn't cut it. You need to improve, so we're proposing, if anything goes forward, to have a 10% improvement on water quality. We're also recommending, as part of the land development code amendments, to selectively incorporate LEED community design and building design standards, the concept being that if there is new development in the area, it's going to be green, it's going to be energy efficient, and that will be a good thing for the area. The last 2 would be to implement a more comprehensive trail and open space greenway program with appropriate administrative funding. That's provided by the MSU. Again, it's a tremendous resource for parks and recreation, so that's part of the recommendation. And then the final aspect is, as part of the land development codes, to put in place new procedures of incentive. So if you're going to go forward with a PD, to have a streamlined permitting process, because the process that we're recommending is really more development agreement oriented rather than just strict PD. So we see the development agreement going hand in hand with the plan development and their opportunities to streamline that approach.
Which brings us to our conclusions, and I know that was a lot, and we'll try to just bring it together for you here at the end. As I said, I think we'd all like to see that area restored, but I think it's clear to see that that is not a financially feasible option. We did look at it, but it's not considered a financially feasible option. The next option is status quo, and the major concerns with status quo is that we do know that there is poor water quality leaving that area. Drainage and surface water storage conditions are not in good shape. There are no modern systems out there. This status quo would invite piecemeal development with regard to the remaining units that can be built out there today, unplanned development with no central utilities. So that does bring us to some level of increased density scenario, and Greg did go over the MSBU and MSTU approach. What that does is it gives us improved water quality in the Imperial River and Estero basins, construction of modern drainage systems for water quality and stormwater attenuation or flood protection, conservation land acquisition, and by the way, that includes retaining those areas that I talked about in the perimeter that are green today would stay green in this plan. Long-term maintenance of the outfalls, which as an engineer I think is the most important component to any land east of I-75. It's critical to keep those outfalls open, and the city's doing a wonderful job, but wouldn't it be nice to have a perpetual funding source for that so that you know it's always going to be maintained in the highest condition. Other benefits include sources to help pay for the East Terry and Bonita Grand 4-laning, which we talked about earlier, which will happen with or without this. Dedicated funding source for local road and intersection improvements. Again, those intersection improvements are those improvements which could push those 4-laning projects off into the future. And finally, a dedicated funding source for trails, landscape, and streets. Finally, in our conclusion, and I'm going to deviate from the screen a little bit, from an engineering and planning perspective, and this is important to me, it's our team's collective professional opinion that restoration, while maybe most desirable, is not financially feasible. Status quo, given existing conditions of the area and titled units, is not sustainable or desirable. And finally, then we come to an increase, and it is suggested that some level of density increase with modern drainage systems, central utilities, is the preferred option. The extent of that density may vary as long as it is large enough to make that increase financially feasible so it could pay for itself and it can be a viable area. That concludes our presentation. We will open up to questions and answers, and as you've been asked, there'll be a microphone coming around. So we're going to try to take this slowly so that everybody has a chance to speak, and so we can all hear the question and the answer. Can you guys come up?
Need some applications. Need some forms.
Oh, this evening you do not need forms. You just state your name. You can raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone over to you. If you would please speak clearly in the microphone, because we are broadcasting live and we'll be recording afterwards.
Good evening. Nicole Johnson here on behalf of the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. And thank you for your presentation and all of the good information that was contained in the report. One piece of information that I did not see as part of your assessment is in the comprehensive plan under Objective 9.3. And Policy 9.3.3 already requires an additional 50% retention detention of water quality for all projects in the city. So just want to make sure that, first of all, we're not providing incentives in this DRGR plan for things that are already required, and making sure that what you are proposing is consistent with and perhaps exceeds these requirements, because BMPs are part of this, treatment train. So I think for the individual projects, a lot of it is here already. As far as the idea of increased density, I think it's a bit premature to start talking numbers of additional units. You have a lot of good information before you. The South Lee County Watershed Plan Update Study, it has a lot of very specific items that it asks the city to look at. For example, a large reservoir constructed in the eastern portions of the watershed. We need to have those physical projects mapped. That plus looking at where do we want flowways, where do we want greenways. The examples that you used in your study are single owner master plan communities. So the application comes in, you can make sure that you have the proper mix of everything. But when we're talking about multiple owners here, I think we need to have all these things mapped out. Then you see what's left over, then you determine what sort of density increases are going to be appropriate. And then from that, the transportation planning follows. So we see the cart is a bit before the horse, and we're definitely going to be sitting down and talking with you guys about that. But we appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, and let me answer those if I could. And first of all, this is one of the stakeholders we met with. We met with over 34 stakeholders or groups of stakeholders, some more than once, and I don't think we ever turned down a meeting. So we did want to get that information. We already received a lot of good information, and we're going to meet again to discuss your issues. Let me assure you that with regard to the design standards, it wasn't our intent to bypass those. Our intent is to be at or above those, certainly with water quality. And if we need to clarify that language, we can. I think your second comment with regard to a reservoir, and I think that's a current study, but I think even that current study concluded, it's not done, but the opinions I think I'm seeing is that the cost of that and the benefits would not be, would not materialize. But that study is coming out, I think, in several months. And finally, we'll discuss this more. We talked about trying to establish flowways in the area. To do that, you need a lot of detailed information, which we don't have, because we're looking at a specific 4,000 acres within thousands of acres and square miles of study area that we analyzed. So our thought is that if any development goes forward, they will have to look at those detailed physical constraints on the ground, because what we don't want to do is tie someone's hand and say, you're going to put a flowway here when it really doesn't make sense. So those were our thoughts getting us here tonight. We'll sit down with you and see if we can make something work and pull everything together. Thank you.
My name is Ed Fitzgerald.
Sir.
I've been here for about 20 years. The presentation is beautiful. Just what I would expect from consultants and from engineers. I'm very skeptical about everything you said, though. Everything, by the way. I wasn't at the first hearing, so I might be repeating myself. I live over in that area, and sheet flow is a major problem and extremely bad. I've been here for 22 years. I've seen 3 floods. You only mentioned one. 92 was as bad as 95, and 205 wasn't as bad. But if you develop that land, you raise that land, that sheet flow has to go someplace. Now, you mentioned condensate. You'd have to convince, 3,000 or 4,000 people who live out there that that compensation is going to work. Okay, that's one. Most of what your report says, and I read a lot of it, not all of it, says the information you have is gathered from consensus opinion, other people's studies, and I worry about the water recharge. I'd like to have 2 people tell me that there is no problem. The recharge water, not necessarily not coming from there. One is BSU, who supplies the water to the entire city. I don't see enough of BSU in this report. Affirmative, convincing statements that would take away my fear. And I don't see it from Southwest Florida either. I also hear you say you're going to put septics out there, some of the original.
Actually, that's what we're trying to avoid.
Can't imagine that would even think septics in 2013. Again, makes me skeptical of everything you say. I have, okay, that's about it. One other thing you said, the flooding condition after your project goes in, you assume it will be no worse than it is now. Basically, something to that effect. That's completely unacceptable to people who live out in East Bonita. We've had 3 serious floods, and we think that there's no way you can raise that land and handle that sheet flow without impacting on us greatly. Okay. I'll try to speak a little bit more later if you'll let me. Thank you.
And we'd be happy to sit down with you after the meeting, or if you, I'll have my business cards up here if you'd like to discuss further. I'm going to try to address those as best I can because there were a few. The first is septic tanks, and really what we're proposing is an alternate to septic usage of septic tanks in that area. If nothing is done in the status quo, I would expect many additional septic tanks to be used out there because there is no other way for any of those units that are entitled to be built out there today to have a sewage collective system. There is one central private system out there, but it's a private system and it only serves a certain area. So many of those additional units would be on septic if status quo. That was easy. With regard to Bonita Springs Utilities, you really didn't see a lot in there because, for several reasons. We did meet with Bonita Springs Utilities. I think they are well prepared should something go forward in this area. But more importantly, there are several studies from qualified professionals that conclude the same thing over and over again, which is our raw water source, and it's important to make a distinction between raw water sources, which are deep in our aquifer, and the majority of that comes from well north of us. That's different than our surface water, which is above that confining layer that I mentioned, which again is documented in several reports. So I hope I answered that. With regard to the flooding area, and this is documented, in a flood event, that area, sheet flow no longer is significant because it becomes a reservoir. It fills up and it's a big pool. You have to understand that area holds the runoff from over 300 square miles of land. So there's a lot of land that drains to that area. And we're talking about 4,000 acres within over 300 square miles of land. But it still has to be considered. What I said earlier was that, in my professional opinion, there's nothing that we're going to see that will significantly improve flooding conditions in that area. And I fully expect based on what I've read from the Water Management District consultant a few days ago in the paper, that they're going to conclude the same thing. They did look at the reservoir, and I think their price tag estimate was $40 million, and even that would not have a significant effect. So the first thing I wanted to do is be very upfront and say, no matter what happens, please don't expect any significant improvement in the drainage. I do think, because any new development in these areas would have modern surface water management systems, would provide some level of improvement, but I don't think in that large drainage area it would be measurable. I just want to be as straightforward with you as I can. So that's my answer to the drainage issue, and I hope I covered most of your questions. If not, again, I'll be here on my card up here, and I'll spend as much time as I need to with you.
Hello, my name's Dennis Church. I've been a resident and involved in the community in Bonita Springs for 23 years. I'm a planner and a landscape architect, and since Bonita became a city, we have done a very nice job of updating our comprehensive plan. We inherited a lot of stuff from Lee County, and we've spent a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of consulting to update and modernize our comprehensive plan. And so my question is, why don't we do it here? I applaud the study they've done. I think there's a lot of good work in there. It at least provides a framework for a comprehensive study, a comprehensive plan amendment. And you know, there's a saying that's popular now, it is what it is. Well, in this case, the DRGR, it's not what it is. It's not groundwater recharge. It is density reduction, and that's a result of a lawsuit 25 years ago that we inherited, and I think we should fix it. We've got a solution here. And finally, something that's not in the study that I wish that their scope was larger was an economic analysis, not just the public sector, but the private sector. Imagine if the number is 6,300 homes. Homes built and designed just like the homes we live in, just like the communities we live in, but that's a $1.2 billion investment in Bonita Springs. I think most people would think that makes sense. So I applaud what you've done. Sorry I didn't have any real questions in there, but I wanted to share that.
And actually, you did have a question, and that is, why not make the change? And my answer to that is, what we are trying to do is put forth as much data and analysis so that decision makers can make an informed decision no matter which way they go. So I hope we've done that. We're going to strive to continue to do that until our job's done.
I am going to ask that you please all hold the microphone up, because we are recording live and some folks at home can't hear this conversation. They're very interested.
Thank you. I'm Dan Wagner, Worthington Country Club. I'm not quite as old as Ed. He lived there too, but I only went through one of those floods. But that was a pretty good one, 95. We know what it is. We invested over $100,000 in improvements in our property to try to fend that off for anything but a 200-year flood. But we know we haven't solved the problem. We're down under, we're in the basin and so forth. And I don't believe there's any way that the city of Bonita Springs would let a development be built that has the potential, if nothing else, of sending more water to those communities and potentially flood them. That would be an error on anyone's part, everyone's part that would vote for such a thing. You say you can't make it better, we understand that, without $40 million. However, the potential to make it worse is dangerous to our community and to our financial behalf. You did a study apparently on some traffic. Apparently no study at the intersection of 75 and Bonita Beach Road, which will be heavily, heavily raised if this type of development would go on. And so I think you avoided that somehow. You did the other two, but not the real big one. All So this is my question, see if you can help.
Okay, and I'll take the drainage, and then Jim's going to take the transportation. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. If there was any chance of any degradation of the flood protection of the area east of 75, I would not be standing in front of you and suggesting that. Not only does the city have a responsibility to protect the residents east of I-75, but so does the state of Florida through the South Florida Water Management District. They have very good rules in place. We have to abide by them with every development we do, and if it is done right, I would expect a slight improvement in the flooding characteristics east of 75. When I say slight, nothing that you'd be able to measure, but I am confident that if it's done right, there would be no degradation in flood protection. There would be a slight improvement, which again, I don't think you'd really observe. So that's the drainage, and I will probably preach that on and on about the drainage because I believe that. And with regard to the transportation, I think Jim did take a look at that intersection. Jim, can you say a few words about that? Why don't you come up here, Jim?
The I-75 in Bonita Springs interchange has already been programmed for improvements in the future to accommodate the extension of Logan Boulevard from Collier County to Bonita Beach Road, as well as the potential of 951 extension. And when they studied the interchange, they also considered the additional rooftops that will occur, that will be built out east on Bonita Beach Road. They did take into account the existing entitlements in the DRGR area, which is a total of 2,700 dwelling units that could be there today. There's 962. And what we did is then, when we were looking at the various threshold increases, potential increases in density, we then assigned that additional traffic also to the interchange design to make sure that there was still adequate capacity with those improvements, and there were. I just didn't put that in the report as I thought it was getting a little too far out of what was the areas of consideration, for the very reason that the I-75 interchange was already programmed for those improvements. So we can add that as a supplement information or provide it directly to you if you want to take a look at that and consider that.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Hi, my name is Deborah McLean, and I'm the publisher of the Banana Peel. And I want to thank Mr. Church for bringing up the words economic impact. If we do nothing in the DRGR, our existing properties will escalate in value and we'll never have to increase our millage rate. And this will happen because we have a 650-seat Southwest Florida cultural center with national venues coming on Bonita Beach Road. We have a performing arts center of 400 seats, and we have 100 acres that the casino will be sitting on. There is no reason to increase the number of people in Bonita. We can become the most exclusive city by saying no. Our properties will go up in value and your taxes will go down.
Yes, Alex Grant. I'm going to put my soil science hat on here. And basically, we have a large problem of hydric soils there in the DRGR area. And that needs to be really looked at, number one. Number two, we are at this funnel of this Imperial River watershed. And that is something that we can't control because that is outside our city limits. In other words, we're getting water in high rain type areas from Immokalee area, from Lehigh Acres area, etc. And that water has to come down to Bonita Springs. That is where the problem lies. And trying to overbuild in an area where you've got water coming in is just a recipe for disaster. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Meg Jacobson. I live in San Remo at Palmyra, which is east of the interstate, so I'm a vitally interested customer here. I'm not as old as the two men who talked about the flowways. I've only been here for 9 years, but I saw the flood in 2005, so I have some experience in that. I share their concern about the flowway. I know you said it's not going to get better, but how can you prove to us that it's not going to get worse? I mean, that's our concern. I'm not sure any of us are setting a goal of 10% improvement. We just don't want any denigration to make the situation worse. And to that end, I guess I have two related questions. Has Swift Mud, South Florida Water Management District, seen your plan, and do they concur, based on what you've accumulated here in your report, do they concur that it will not denigrate? And then I know BSU says they can easily accommodate all the potable water, but have they actually said that in writing or in person? I mean, is this just kind of one of those general consensuses? Because we don't want to run out of water and we don't want to be drowned in it. So those are my two concerns.
Okay. And I'll answer those. No, we do not have anything in writing from Bonita Springs Utilities. We can pursue that in a few days. Hopefully we can get some cooperation out of BSU on that. But we have had several meetings with them. We also met with the Water Management District, and I will not speak for them, but I think what they would tell you is if you look at their base of review, which is state law, by law, the area cannot be degraded. And I can be happy to sit down and show you that language in the rules, but essentially it is the compensating storage rule, where if you take storage out of a floodplain area, 100-year floodplain area, it has to be considered and mitigated for. And I can't prove that to you. There's only one way to prove that, and that is to go through it. So I just want to share all the information that I have with you.
Hi, my name is Tori Polanitsa, and I'm a 20-year resident of this area that we're speaking of. And I think that sometimes I just want to make sure that everybody understands and ask you, make sure that I'm on the right idea here, is that sometimes when I hear people speak about this area, it's spoken of as if there's going to be no development there at all. Like if we do nothing, it'll just stay conserved or something, as opposed to realizing that people own 5-acre and 3-acre parcels out there, and they have the right to build. But there's no infrastructure out there for that building, and there's no real, I'm not that savvy, but best land use management practices, all those things aren't written in because it's under this DRGR classification. So if people are allowed to build on their land, they own that land. Then this, it would seem from what I'm seeing from your study, is a way to bring this forward in the best possible way. It's not a question of just leaving it and then it'll drain better. It doesn't drain, and the roads don't work, and people can continue to build. So I just wanted, is that, yeah?
Actually, you got it.
Okay.
You said it better than I could. But let me try to say it again. If you look at the data that Greg put together, it shows that there are 752 more units entitled for that study area. That's the 4,000 acre area, 752 units. The majority of those, if built today, would be built with well and septic tanks. In addition, when you build every one of those units without a modern water management system, they're going to bring in fill, they're going to raise that foundation, and they don't have to compensate. So the point I was trying to get across, and I wish I could have done as good as you did, is I'm really concerned that status quo is not a good option, and I am not doing a good enough job conveying that if I can't get everybody to see the things that you saw. So thank you.
Good afternoon. Birgit Dagge, 20-year resident, also real estate broker in real estate for 20 years in this town. I've seen all of the water coming, and the water is not coming from heaven alone. It's coming from Lake Okeechobee, and it's also coming from the quarry. So if you're living out there and you see the water coming, it is water that's coming right now that's pumped at certain days to prevent Lake Okeechobee from doing what it did about 70, 80 years ago, flood an entire region at Lake Okeechobee, and all those people are very worried up there, like the Worthington people are here right now worried. But Worthington is a fairly new community, or everything east of 75 is fairly new. When that was planned, it was planned wrong. The only thing that can fix that is money. The only way to get money is new development. And to the banana peel, if we are an exclusive community, your taxes will raise, even if the density is lower, because then the property values go up, and you might be saved by homestead exemption for a couple of years, but ultimately your taxes go up, so that's not a significant enough reason to not build. The one way Bonita can be saved from this water is to build in a controlled way and leave watershed areas in between. There is watershed areas, but they're so overgrown. If you drive Morton at the corner where it turns right, where it goes back to Bonita Grande, there is a huge channel there, which the neighbors pick out every year by themselves for our land to not drain in water. So if that could be taken over by the newly built communities, we would stay drier. And it is the people, we are living there, we're dry. It's the streets that are wet, it's the land that's undeveloped that is wet. So if my neighbor starts building tomorrow only one house on his land and raises it, then I'm all of a sudden going to be wet. If someone controls this neighbor and builds 5 or 10 houses on the 10 acres and controls it and makes sure that water has a proper way of running off, I'm staying dry. What happens in Worthington, Palmyra, I-75, the flea market, are building mistakes. And they can't be fixed without money. The only way to get money, let's build it. So I'm totally for higher density. And the quarry, I think, is bringing 3,000 houses already, right?
I don't think so. I want to make sure I answer all questions. If there was a question there, I'll answer it, but okay.
There was a remark regarding higher real estate taxes, which is totally incorrect. Taxes will rise if the property values rise. We're going to be inclusive. Exclusive community with lower taxes will be the first one in Florida.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Donna Stone. I also live at Worthington. I have a couple of points that I'd like to make about your report here. The use of all of the alphabet letters and without any legend explaining what they all are is very, very frustrating. You said that this data is for decision makers. The data should be for the residents so we can understand what you're talking about. And so you can't abbreviate without describing. You can't use 0.5 units per acre without giving the total number of houses. You have to follow the formula. You have to give totals on every single, on your Northeast Quadrant land use page, you have to give totals for every single formula that you're talking about. On your recommendation page, for every single quadrant that you have there, you have to show the possible total per quadrant that you're talking about so people can understand and they can judge and they can look at it. The other thing also is that you're talking about runoff, but you're not showing roads. You're not showing driveways. That affects also runoff. That affects your sheet flow. That affects your drainage and everything else. I don't see one thing in here about the infrastructure of roads, and that is a huge concern. The other thing also is how is this going to affect our other infrastructure like police and fire and the schools? How many schools are we talking about? How many possible students are we talking about? And what does that do to our tax rate? One of the other things that has me concerned was your statement about the filtering of the nitrogen and the phosphorus. How are you going to filter that? Are you, each landowner, going to have a filter on a drain so that their use gets filtered out, which would be absolutely wonderful, and then we would have beautiful, clear rivers, and all the water going into the ocean would be absolutely perfect, and we would have a wonderful bay, and everything would be sweet and lovely. But I don't see that happening, and I don't see any infrastructure to make that happen. And what happens to all the developments that are built now? For example, Worthington, are you going to insist that we put filters on everything? So you really have to explain when you're talking about the filtering out. You have a lot of stuff that you've brought up, but you use very general terms without going into depth. And I think you need to go into depth in order for us to be able to be comfortable with this many houses.
Thank you. I'll try to give you as many answers as I can on that. First, nothing we're proposing would affect any existing developments. Second, with regard to reducing nitrogen and phosphorus from the stormwater runoff, that's actually something that's very recent in terms of engineering, and that's what is presented as part of a master water management system. And that is done through a series of lakes, filter marshes, detention areas, dry and wet. There are several different practices that can be used. We're actually, just in the last few years, getting to the point where we can quantify what results we can expect from a design and a system. Several years ago, we talked about it, we tried things, but we really didn't know what to expect. We're getting that science now where we can design systems to provide known results. So there wouldn't be individual filters. It's a master water management system, and that's the benefit of master planned drainage. We can look at essential services, because I don't think we... You do? Okay. Greg does discuss essential services, and what's that?
Oh, yeah, fire police.
Okay. Fire, police, but if we have to bolster that, we can look at doing that. And I think I hope I got it all. I'm not sure.
Well, and just for the record, we did look, I spoke to the Sheriff's Department. Adding approximately 6,000 new units will require 2 additional law enforcement officers. With the agreement in place, that's going to be around $350,000 annual cost to the city, which when we're looking at the projected ad valorem, is huge. So 350,000, that's so insignificant within the context of that, so we just discounted that. And then in terms of fire district, we're showing approximately $4.9 million in annual ad valorem revenues flowing to the fire district. So we just felt, okay, there's enough money, they can figure it out. And then in regard to the schools, as Carl mentioned, there is going to be a new school, around 2,000 students, elementary, middle school, on the 40-acre site. And so that was factored in just within the context of, okay, how much are the school impact fees? So again, we had that information, but it really wasn't germane to our study. And then finally, for all the detailed technical stuff, we do have appendices online, and I can reintroduce you to the links.
You have to give it in your report for us to understand.
Yeah, but it's like that thick.
Don't say go online, don't say see the handbook. If you're handing out this, we have to know what you're talking about.
And at the meeting, I'll have my cards up here. I'd be happy to spend some time with you and go over some more detail with you. And by the way, the school site is an existing school site that the school board owns out in the area.
Carl, thank you. Russell Schraub, for your record. There's been a number of studies done on the DRGR area through the years since it was first initiated by Lee County, and you went through the list of them up there. And this is, I think, the first effort that I've seen to really take all of the studies and bring them all together in one place and summarize what I think are the most important points out of all of the studies that have been done through the area. And I commend you for doing it in a very readable fashion. It was an excellent report to go through. Having gone through it, I was struck with 3 major points, both from within the study area and 3 major points from outside of the study area that I thought were important. From inside the study area, the points that I really took away from it is that there really is no groundwater recharge significance attached to this area by any of the studies that have looked at it. And secondly, that all of the environmental, or most of the environmentally significant areas that are ecologically important have already been placed in conservation or public ownership. And the third thing was that there is at least the potential and the capacity to provide sewer and water service on a central basis to this area. And I would really encourage you to kind of pin that down a little bit with Bonita Springs Utilities, because I think that's a critical part of being able to develop the area without using septic systems. Outside of the city, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay. Outside of the city. One of the things that was in the report, and I really would ask you to comment on it, was the tax, I guess ratio is the best way to put it, that this is a fairly large area of the city, comprising about 20% of the total land area, yet it contributes about 1% of the tax revenue to the city. And it seems to me that that shows that the area is probably being underutilized from a municipal revenue generating standpoint. The second thing is that the point that I would take out of that from a citywide perspective is the city has roads to build, or somebody has roads to build within the city, and there needs to be some additional funding sources identified. And the third thing is that at least the development of the properties within the study area does provide the ability for some surface water management and surface water quality improvements to be done that would be of benefit to the general public. Those are my comments, and especially on the tax thing, I'd appreciate your comments or elaboration.
Well, I'll start, but then Greg can add to it. We intentionally, we did look at the economics outside. We didn't want this to be solely about economics, so we really didn't get too detailed into that, but we do have a lot of data, and Greg, if you can give us a real short summary of that, that might help.
Right. Just for the record, it's approximately 21% of the city's land area that comprises DRGR, and it's generating approximately 1% of your annual ad valorem. That's around 55,000. Basically, the city has gone very successful at City Light, keeping the tax rates low because the property values are high. But one of the things in our report is that down the line, there are huge infrastructure projects that are going to cost a lot of money, and it's not sustainable unless you do something. And one of the solutions that we're providing or proposing is, okay, here's some new revenue sources, the MSU and the MSTU. So again, economics is a part of it. It's part of the consideration, because what we wanted to do is look at all the elements, environmental, infrastructure, economics. So hope that answers your question.
And I'm sure Greg has a lot more information, but we really did not want to present this as an economic study. I really wanted to look at the engineering issues, because when we had all our stakeholder meetings, we didn't hear economics. We heard drainage, we heard raw water sources, we heard the environment, and that's really key. So I appreciate the question. We intentionally did not go there, but we do have the data.
Hello, Charlie Strader, Kent Road, DRGR. About 30 years, and I too am skeptical, particularly when we seem to be quick to go from the three options you started off with, which is the do-nothing, restoration, and then increased density. I doubt there's few that would agree with a totally do-nothing approach or not plan for future development or what is there coming already existing. I guess what bothers me is the options for restoration. You often seems to equate that with acquisition, which is certainly one method of restoration, but seem to be very light on other methods of restorations. In other words, the low-hanging fruit to improve water quality and water drainage. It's practically not addressed in the report. You skip straight to, oh, the only way to do that is to increase density. That concerns me. I'll try to narrow it down to just 5 things today, or 4. 2, I was a little disappointed not to see anything about a TDR mentioned, meaning that there's transfer of development rights program, because there's certainly areas that are more practical for development and less practical for development. If we're talking about running utilities out there, some areas are just going to be impractical. We have riverine areas in the rest of the DRGR. So you're not talking about moving the density around, you're just talking about adding density. 3, when I was reading the traffic studies and tried to understand how that is a failing road, or LOS 3E, and then you also mention it sometimes F, which confused me, but I'm easily confused. But the other thing I could not find in there was if you're saying you're going to 4-lane the road, Terry Street in particular, what about the overpass over I-75? I didn't see the cost of that in the study. Is the federal government going to give us one, or are you going to crowd 4 lanes into the 2 there? So I'm kind of wondering how you're going to try to address that. In other words, what's the sense 4-laning a road and having your bottleneck? So the overpass. 4, I'm reminded, saying it doesn't necessarily make it so, and the seemingly, to me, magical addition of anything that's going to be built is going to make the water 10% better. Sounds wonderful. That's just fantastic. But how do you really do that? In other words, are you going to test the water before they build? You want to test the water after they build? Who's responsible for the testing? And who's going to verify it if it doesn't? So, and change it if it's not correct. So that's just, you know, to me is just words on, well, I would say paper, but we have better technology today. And then finally, for your sake, maybe someone up there is better mathematics, better at math than I, but the underlying zoning right now is 1 unit per 10 acres. You're proposing 3 to 3.5 units in some areas per acre. I believe that's a 3,000% increase in density. So,
Okay,
so
we're
I'm
gonna-
just questioning my math.
Okay, we'll try to go through those, and there'll be several of us doing that. First of all, with the restoration, if you look at the existing conditions, the way we looked at it is you really can't do piecemeal restoration out there because you have an existing residential area and you have existing agriculture, and those are the two worst land uses with regard to water quality and the two most intrusive to restoration. So, and they comprise the majority of the land out there. So if you're going to do restoration, you really have to go after the whole thing. That was our thought on that. The TDR, my quick answer is, and if we need more, Greg can answer it. There's very little density left in the city of Bonita, so there's no density to move anywhere. With regard to, I'm going to let Jim go on the traffic after I do the water quality, and the water quality testing would be part of their permits, and it would be done by the operational entity that is required to be formed with any master water management system. So we would intend, and if we need to clarify that, we would, that the operational entity would be required to test and show the results of those systems. Jim is going to talk to you about the 4-laning overpass, and then Greg will talk to you about the zoning and the numbers.
I think your question was, when we 4-lane East Terry Street, which is programmed sometime around the year 2035. And that need was identified by the MPO due to the new traffic demands associated with Logan Boulevard extension that will extend from Collier County up to Bonita Beach Road. And in addition to that, the potential for 951 extension from Collier County to Bonita Beach Road. And the additional rooftops that will be constructed out east on Bonita Springs. So what occurs is that those residents that live out east on Bonita Beach Road use Bonita Grand Drive and East Terry Street as a bypass route to get into certain areas of Bonita Springs. And so as these additional rooftops come online, and when Logan Boulevard is extended, the MPO has projected that Bonita Grand Drive and East Terry Street will fail sometime as we're approaching the year 2035. Now, as a part of that, they have identified there are the funding mechanisms through impact fees, gas tax, and other methods of funding this, and it will be that East Terry Street will be 4-laned from its intersection at Bonita Grand Drive. It will be constructed as a 4-lane overpass. It will not provide access to I-75, but it will be a 4-lane overpass. And from I-75 to Imperial, that will also be 4-laned. So you will have a continuous 4-lane section from Bonita Grand Drive to Imperial. And the funding has been identified through impact fees and gas taxes. Now, this is part of what we were assigned was when we build this road and we spend the money to build a 4-lane road, do we have excess capacity that could support the additional units in the DRGR area if additional units are approved? And it was determined there will be a substantial amount of capacity still available that would support additional rooftops. Now, I'm not here to try and sell you that we need to increase the density just because we have the capacity, but the fact that there is additional capacity that could be utilized by these units, they will also pay impact fees, which will also contribute towards the funding of East Terry Street, the 4-laning of East Terry Street.
And Charlie? Good to see you, Charlie. And just for
Great.
the record, on the Terry Street issue, in the appendix 09.02, we did give you a breakdown based on MPO, and I'm looking at it now. On Terry Street from Medina Grande to East Imperial, the total aggregate's $81.5 million. They broke it down to engineering, right-of-way acquisition, and construction, but they did not actually break that down into, okay, how much is the road and how much is the flyway? So we just went with their numbers. It didn't give you that specific a breakdown.
81 includes
81.5 million includes the 4-lane flyover, and then in terms of density, with the TDRs or TDUs, in terms of internal shifting, right now there's no density to shift. Basically, what you need are some type of incentives to create that market mechanism. What we decided was, now we're including TDOs as part of our proposals or recommendations. TDUs as part of the incentive densities, but the underlying core densities at 3 units per acre, we were looking at, we'd rather just charge money up front to get the money in rather than mess around with TDUs, so that was our approach. And then finally, with the units and the 3,000% increase, we looked at all kinds of things from low density to medium high density to central urban densities, and we came to the conclusion that a suburban type density is probably appropriate. And typically in Lee County, suburban densities are 3 units an acre, and then 3 units an acre fits into the capacity of the roads being built. It doesn't overpower the roads, but it still manages to provide an efficient use of that infrastructure.
I'm not sure you got your real answer on mathematics. I'd like to think I'm pretty good at mathematics, and I don't think a 3,000% increase is correct.
I'm a planner, I don't do math.
The real number you can look at, I think, is the density out there today, and help me here, Greg, is 0.56 units per acre.
At build-out.
At build-out.
DRGR.
And what you're proposing is 3.
units an acre.
So it's really that 0.56 relative to the 3.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because again, it's important to recognize there are over 1,900 units. The density is basically 1 unit per 2 acres out there already, and at build-out. Right now, the densities at, there are over 1,900 units. At build-out, the density is going to be almost, 0.6 units per acre. So that's one of the things I keep scratching my head about, which is this is 1 unit per 10 acre, but the reality is it's not. Nothing works according to the policy, and so that's what our report's all about.
Yeah, Fred Forbes, Hunters Ridge Community. I've lived here since '97, and I've got a number of questions. So I do want to make a couple observations first. Back roughly 3-4 years ago, there was a move to rename the city's DRGR, and they were going to call it East Bonita. And a city councilman made a motion, and he was tired of hearing that. We're going to keep it DRGR. Now, this study was the DRGR, and it's titled the Northeast Quadrant. So it's kind of the same, like going back. At the highest level of the city, I was told when this started that if we could not absolutely say we're going to significantly improve flooding, they would be against it. Now that's dropped out. I'm for development. I'm an architect, I'm an engineer in another state, so I speak both languages. I'm for developing, and I would be for developing the DRGR. However, I believe that we've got some problems. We should first get South Florida Water Management to redo that flood mitigation study for southern Lee County, put in these proposed development intensities, put in whatever design criteria you want for stormwater management, and see what effects it has. That study would cost around $25,000 or less. The city could issue that money to South Florida Water Management. Secondly, it's been widely discussed that that water that sits out there on the DRGR has no effect on the aquifers. But a lot of these studies were not funded by either South Florida Water Management or the city, and in fact, some of them were funded by the very people that want the land use plan changed. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but there's nothing like true independent, and South Florida Water Management is truly independent. The last thing, and this was mentioned, and I do have a couple questions and suggestions. I said I do have a couple questions and suggestions, but the other thing is that the current state law that's alluded to on stormwater management, it's based on what I would call ordinary land. And the DRGR, even for those that live there, you can't look me in the eye and tell me it's ordinary land. Now, if they made all of Florida adhere to that, it wouldn't work because it would be prohibitively costly. But the other thing that needs to be done is South Florida Water Management needs to be given a little more money to determine how much the stormwater management design criteria would have to be increased to handle that extra sheet flow. Because for every inch of water that falls out of the sky, there's probably another 1 to 2 inches that run in over there over the next week from that rain. Now, let's assume we move forward with this. First of all, the city should not grant rezoning until Bonita's Utilities has a chance to run utilities out there. Because if you do that, prove it right now, you're going to have a whole lot of more homes built with septic tanks. And just think about that. We're saying we want to stop them. So the only way you can stop it, when the guy wants to build, there's got to be a sewer in front of his house. So I would hope that you would put that in your study. I'm for doing this if you can show, I mean by study, not by reading reports that are out of date, but have an actual study done that says it won't flood. Then if it doesn't, great, let's do it. Get on with it. We'll all profit by it and all that. So I'm not against it. I just want it done right, and I want that precursory work done before the city opens a floodgate. Thank you.
I think I heard one question, and that was with regard to more detail and zoning. And the results of this would not sidestep the zoning process. That zoning process would still be a required process, and it's that level where of detail would be looked at during that process. So I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea that there isn't a whole several different levels of procedures and approvals to go through after this. This is just setting the framework of what may be done if the details work out through the zoning process, through the state permitting, and through the local permitting.
Hi.
Oh.
Are you done?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I'm Cullum Hasty, and I am a bundle of skepticism. But there are a lot of good ideas and a lot of interesting information going around. A couple of things. One thing is we keep talking about stormwater problems. We have lots of them. I'm of the opinion also that we're never going to stop the flooding in southwest Florida. That's just the nature of the beast. But do you know, you probably know, some people in here know more about it than I do, but Lee County, before we became a city, had a stormwater utility briefly. And the stormwater utility was a great idea. It got killed somehow. It was a political football that wound up getting dismantled after the voters had voted it in. So that would have been great if back in the year, whenever it was, 92 or something like that, we had persisted with that stormwater utility. A lot of these problems would be clearer, at least. I'm not sure they would have been solved. But Greg, do you know how we're coming along with that really nice flowway that we have a potential to restore? Did you get any detailed information on that? It's called the Jefferson Lane flowway.
Yes, and let me comment, and this relates to a previous gentleman, about, well, DRGR status quo, but actually, if you read the report, even if even if your elected officials recommend not to change anything, we're still making recommendations about funding the Jefferson Flowway. There's been it's a real cursory study, but we're making that recommendation because there are a number of possibilities, there are a number of constraints, but it was way out of the scope on this. And we're also making a few other recommendations, and Cullum, you hit the nail on the head. We're still recommending for DRGR, no change, to do an MSTU for drainage. It's exactly what you're talking about, a utility-oriented, get some money in for maintenance, get these ditches cleaned and keep them clean. So we are still making a lot of recommendations, so don't get just sidetracked on, A, B, and C, but.
Okay, well, just a couple more things real quick, but one of the, my primary concern is the river. We have a gorgeous river here. We've got a beautiful, beautiful, clean, healthy, very much appreciated by a lot of people. I think in the future of Bonita, one of the great things that you'll be hearing about from Bonita for decades to come will be what a gorgeous river to kayak in, to canoe in, to just walk the river trail in. We have a beautiful new river trail along the edge of the river up here in the east part of Bonita. And that's my biggest concern, and my major concern is that I have never seen increase in density and water quality not be at odds. It seems whenever there is a great increase in density in an area, goodbye water quality. It starts to diminish right away as inversely proportional to the increase in the density. So I hope that's not the case if we do increase. I'm very much in favor of restoration, but with no density increase. And of course, that's kind of difficult to achieve, But I think that above all things, we need to protect this river in Bonita, because once we lose it, we'll never get it back, and it is really a treasure. So I'm going to stay tuned and come to the next workshop, and hopefully have, maybe I'll come up with some solutions, who knows. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Janet Daychuck, and I live out off of Bonita Grand, and I have lived out there since 1990, so I have been through all the flooding out there. Just to let you know, my house was high and dry. The road to my house was high and dry. Bonita Grand was flooded, East Terry Street was flooded, and Bonita Beach Road was flooded. The pumping out of Hunter's Ridge and Worthington to keep their golf courses nice and beautiful did not help the flooding purposes at all. Let's face it, the only way Bonita has to grow is east, and I think you guys are on the right track, and I'm all for your DRGR.
I'm Donald Daychuck, and I live out east of Bonita, and they're talking about Worthington and Hunter's Ridge. Well, Hunter's Ridge put their clubhouse in the biggest cypress head there was in Bonita. I've been here for 57 years, and I know where the flooding was. I want everybody to raise their hand that's been here 50 years. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. I've been here 57. And these people that have been here for 10 years, 20 years, live in these gated communities, and they're the ones that have flooded us, because Worthington has a 8 to 10 foot culvert underneath Bonita Beach Road going into the Imperial River that they pump out to save their neighborhood. That is not right. The water is supposed to run, this part of the water in Southwest Florida runs from the north to the west. It does not run north. And they're the ones that are flooding everybody. Everybody on the other side is fine. And we get water all the way from Lake Trafford. We get water all through here. And Ray Judah and Chip Marion at one of the meetings in '92 told me that, I said, I can fix the problem. I can dike down the Collier County line all the way into the back of the pit, because the pit was there. They said, oh no, we cannot shit on our neighbor. And that's exactly what they told me. And Ray Judah stayed in there and stayed in there and stayed in there. He wanted everything to happen in Fort Myers, but not in Bonita. He did not want no development in Bonita, period. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Fred Parton, Benita Springs Utilities. Fred Forbes, we don't run water and sewer for cows and agriculture fields. That doesn't make sense to do that. But we've, well, we provide down Bonita Beach Road, of course. But Bonita Springs Utilities has been a champion for the water resources, the environment, and the economic development of this community since we began over 40 years ago. We developed sewers, eliminated septic tanks. We've had the greatest impact on the bay and the river than any other entity. So I'm very proud of our history, what we've done. I've read your report. We've had other reports done by our own consultants, and you've done a good job of reflecting the history of the DRGR. You also summarized well all the reports accurately, and I commend you for that. And you addressed the economic benefits of making some of these changes. If we don't make these changes, some of these changes, it's going to remain the same. We'll look at that area 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and it will look exactly the same. The only improvements, minimal improvements that have been made in this area is with like the utility. And with the improvements we've made, we've created water retention areas, and that does help clean up the surface water in that immediate area and is a net benefit to that area. So we really need to step forward. We need to take care of it. Doing more of the same really is not the answer. And I'd like to make myself available to City Council and other residents if you should have any questions. Thank you.
Is everyone who...
Thank you. My name is Dennis Gilkey. I've been here since 1984, and I started as Director of Development for Bonita Bay, and I think that's a good example of environmental responsible development as far as water quality and quantity. When I was president of Bonita Bay Group, we developed the Brooks, which was responsible for opening up the flowway after the 95 flood through into the Estero River because the I-75 had blocked the drainage from the watershed area and caused the flooding, was very much responsible for a lot of the flooding that happened in 95. In 1987 through 89, I was involved, I'm actually co-chair of a group called the Bonita Study Group, and it involved people like Fred Parton, Dan Gorley, who was our fire chief, John Spear, Tina Shuklett, a lot of the community from every walk of life that we can find in the community. The Bonita area, the east area, was planned with the rest of Bonita Springs as suburban, very similar to what's being proposed 25 years ago. The area actually that's being studied now was shown as higher density than the area that's farther down Bonita Beach Road to the east, because those farm fields were those were pumped. This area was naturally higher, so we figured that this was actually the more suitable area for development even than the projects that you see at the far end of Bonita Beach Road. What happened in 1991 was the local group did a comprehensive plan. Lee County basically negotiated with the state of Florida for density reduction, and the Bonita Springs area was included with another 80 to 90,000 acres in Lee County as part of the DRGR area. That decision had nothing to do, Bonita was not part of that decision, and it was not part of a plan. It happened as part of a settlement. So, but I think the thing on the flooding and the drainage, and I do support the study. I think the money spent by the city, by far, this is the most efficient study that we've seen done. I think it makes a lot of sense economically, environmentally, and drainage-wise as well. I think that there's 3 areas for the water to get out: the Estero River, the Imperial River, and the Cocohatchee River. That whole watershed drains to those areas, and each of those areas has to be looked at and improved. It is a system-wide area improvement. The Brooks and some of the other areas for the Estero branches are improving the flood characteristics now, the Imperial River, the snagging, Peel Canal, and the same thing happens with the Cocohatchee. There's improvements underway. I'm involved in the Esplanade of Naples development that also has this compensating storage. Years and years of environmental permitting are required for these new developments, and all of them have to prove not only water quality, but water quality enhancement, or at least no net degradation. But I do think that this area should be and can be developed. The drainage issue, this is tens of thousands of acres of a watershed. The basin that we need is the natural areas, the tens of thousands of acres of natural wetlands that we have to the east of this area, to the north of this area, up to and including north of Corkscrew Road. Also far east and even east of the most easterly developments on Beach Road. So we have our storage. We just need to make sure that we control how it outfalls, how much is stored in the wetland areas, and then how it's released. And I do think this is development. I think it's a good report. I think that it's time for the change. You know, if it's going to have, it's got a 40-acre school site, it's got a YMCA site, it's got a future charter high school site, it's got Bonita Springs Utilities major wastewater plant, it's got Bonita Springs Utilities operational center, it's got 2,000 units, including those at Morton Grove and Citrus Park. This area is not some pristine area. It needs to probably be looked at from a comprehensive way. And I think the study, rather than what Mr. Forbes suggested with the district doing the study, the city should do that as part of its comprehensive plan amendment. If we leave it up to the district, it'll never get done. And it'll just be another study to study a future study. I think we have to take control and say, let's assume, if it's 6,300 units, let's make that happen and then make it work in the context of the district. Let them look at it, but let's control it. Don't let somebody else do a 2-year study that sits on a shelf and then dies, like most studies do that are done outside of the local jurisdictions. So anyway, thank you very much.
Corkscrew Road to the pit. They have came off of Corkscrew Road almost to the pit right now with houses.
My name is Bill Morris. I'm a civil engineer. I've been practicing in Lee County since 1997. And I do support the concepts that have been established in the report insofar as stormwater management are concerned. It has been my experience that large, comprehensive stormwater management systems are the most efficient uses of, or are the most efficient ways to manage the stormwater management resource. Also, I support the concept of bringing central sewer to these development areas. I believe that is an excellent way of making sure that the water quality is not degraded. To the point about the water quality, Carl, you mentioned that the South Florida Water Management District regulations are quite clear in that they require us to demonstrate when we design projects that they do not impair or adversely impact either upstream or downstream the other lands. And I believe that these will all be done in accordance with those regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Arlene's in back.
Yeah, Fred Forbes, Hunters Ridge. Want to clarify a couple things I said. Number one, Hunters Ridge does not pump any water onto anybody. So that needs to be said. I can understand a mistake, but I want to make sure that everybody here understands it. And if you don't believe me, come over and we'll show you around. Second thing, all I said was, if the city was going to approve rezoning, that before they do it, come up with some kind of an agreement between Bonita Springs Utilities and the city so that they can then run the sewer out there. So we won't get people, as soon as the zoning's approved, building houses on septic tanks. Now, going back, a $25,000 study does not take 2 years. Shouldn't even take a year. It should be a matter of months. And I still say that the design criteria for ordinary land and large developments will not satisfactorily prevent some flooding, and we need to look at not 25-year, we need to look at all the different storms. We can't afford to create bigger floods in that area than we already get. Thank you. We lost the YMCA as your one and only hurricane shelter, because when FEMA redrew the flood maps, they say that it could have a foot of water in a storm. So we lost that because of FEMA. So if we're not careful, you could redraw the flood maps again. Thank you.
My name is Larry Quintano. I'm also from Worthington Country Club. The gentleman that said that Worthington pumps out is untrue. We do not pump. We do not pump out. We outflow. We did not. Okay, 92 because the farmer. Wait a minute. Hold it. The farmer where Palmyra was right now was pumping into our property. That's why we were trying to get water out. If you were in Worthington in 1995, we were underwater. Okay.
Everybody in Bonita was too.
Okay. Now, wait a minute. But these developments were built by Lee County. Well, allowed these developments to be built. We came down from the north and we bought a house. It's not our problem that they did not plan the properties properly. Okay. And again, we do not pump out, we outflow per South Florida Water Management District's approval. We do it to the north. But that is allowed by South Florida Water Management District. We do not pump out, we outflow.
Folks, listen, we're here not to get into it with each other, okay? We really want to talk about the report and hear your concerns and your questions about the report. If we could do that, that'd be great. Who has not spoken yet, who would like the microphone? Not spoken yet. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Bob Thinnis. Regarding the total nitrogen mandate, what happens if we don't meet it?
If the test results show that they're not meeting it, the permit's going to require that they take some action. Okay? And whenever there's a new development, there's a permit and there are requirements, and they could be held in violation until they find a remedy. And again, as I said, this is a fairly new science, and we're finally getting some data that we can use to define systems with some certainty. It's a good question, though.
Is there anyone else who has not had the microphone and would like an opportunity to speak?
Good evening. Brian for our BCF Management Group, speaking on behalf of my client, Citrus Park. I just want to thank you guys for being very fair and meeting with us, reviewing the data. I think it's been fairly put together. I think what most of the folks here in the room have provided for relative to review of not only the stormwater management and the improvements there, also the traffic information that Mr. Banks has provided. I think that gives us all a good reflection of what the future will lie. I think it's important to understand that most of these improvements will be happening over the 10, 15, or 20-year period of time. And I think it's hard for people to look at that perspective, but I think it's important to do that. I think it's also, while we've been light on the ad valorem tax benefits of what's going on out here, having 6,000 units or more to any community, whether the values are going up or even they're stagnant, it's a benefit overall to the overall city of Bonita Springs, and I think that's a very important thing to, I would say, put forth in your report. But thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who hasn't had the opportunity to speak yet?
Hi, Donna Stone. I had two additional questions I wanted to see if you would consider. One was, right now we live in what's designated as a tropical desert. So that means quite a bit of our year we have no substantial rain. That's the desert part. The rest, the tropical part, is when we get our rain. Now, the part of the desert when we don't get the rain, a lot of the area is extremely dry. I mean, we have fire hazard, we have most of the surface water dries up. I mean, any area that has any lakes, the lakes go down substantially. And I was curious as to whether you would put into consideration that the water that's discharged be used as a reclamation plant so that all water discharge goes into a reclamation, so the potable water then is used for all of the developed area so that lawns can be watered and everything else with, you know, constant use of rewater rather than using up the aquifer. That is going to be a serious problem if we don't start addressing it. I mean, you know, you just can't keep using water saying, you know, it's always going to be there. You have to start having good water practices. My other concern is that you haven't talked about what happens in a hurricane evacuation plan with this development. Where are they supposed to, where is their route? Is it to Terry, Bonita Grand, and then on to Bonita Beach Road? Or are you talking about an additional entrance onto 75?
Well, the first one, you won't like my answer, but I'll tell you the way I see it. We live in Florida. When it's in the wet season, it's wet, and we have too much rain, too much water. When it's in dry season, it's dry, and we don't have enough. There's just no cost-feasible way to store that water, and some technology has looked into that. It's just not been perfected yet. So I don't have a good answer for you on that front. With regard to hurricane evacuation, I'm going to see if either Greg or Jim have an answer.
Yes. Hurricane evacuation, this area is outside of all the surge zones and all that. So in terms of evacuation, will probably be receiving people. What we are proposing as part of our standards, and again, if the increased density goes forward, if you read the core business overlay, one of the standards, what we recommend is that the development in there would have hurricane evacuation shelters built. And then finally back to the, you know, the tropical desert. They're micro basins, but part of the site development standards that we would want to see incorporated in the rules really do relate to that in terms of individual home sites having micro basins and rain gardens and that type of stuff. It doesn't deal with the macro issues, but hey, every drip counts, and so we're trying to do the best on the existing standards. But as Carl said, aquifer storage, I mean, look at the Water Management District's budgets. You're talking about eight-digit type budgets to do aquifer storage, and it's still an unproven technology.
Ed Fitzgerald. I just want to finish up. I want to just make a couple of remarks. Worthington is not, myself and Worthington, we're not against increasing the density over there. Why should we? We live there, and we would gain from it. And your proposal is excellent. You've taken care of everything, roads, schools, except water, and sufficiently to satisfy me anyway. And if this proposal goes through, and it may go through, I feel that the people in East Bonita, the East Bonita Stakeholders Associations, will be the sacrificial lamb. Not often, just on those every 5 or 10 year floods will be flooded out. That's all. I think the density increase is a good idea.
Deborah McLean again with the Banana Peel. I disagree with the density increase. In Naples, when I was a child, we had many kitchen table discussions with the newspapers, editors, and city council, and they chose not to annex, and they chose not to grow because they knew they could then manage their populations, their streetscapes, and their streets, and their sewer, and their electric. Exclusivity means scarcity. So when you add 20,000 more people, 2 persons per household, and the impact fees are spent, and you have another fire station, and you have more deputies, Then you have the long-term maintenance of infrastructure, which does age. Right now, Bonita has an older section, which has suffered economically for a very long time. And if we do not expand into the DRGR, those areas will flourish because of this scarcity. Again, remember the casino, 650-seat cultural center, and a 400-seat performing arts center. Our community is changing. It doesn't need to get bigger in the number of people. It needs to improve the quality of life, its streetscapes. It needs to be able to afford its new roadways in the older section. The downtown Bonita Old 41 corridor has been dead since Eisenhower put in the new 41, the highway program. It's not going to get any better if we keep sprawling, and this is sprawl to the east. The only way to clean up downtown and now clean up and save New 41 and in District 3 along the beach, if you're going to add 20,000 more people, how are they going to get to the beach? How are you, the existing residents, going to get to the beach? There is no parking now. We just don't need more residents. We need to take care of what we already have.
Yes, Alex Grant. I probably didn't make myself clear before. Let me give you a little background. I have a master's degree in soil science from North Carolina State University in Raleigh. I have lived here since 1980, and my parents bought the property here where I live in 1959. So I do know a little bit about the area. Plus, I have the Hydric Soils of Florida Handbook, the Soil Survey of Lee County, and I have studies done by Rick Barber for the Bonita Springs area, Hydric Soils area. This is a serious problem. I don't care what anybody thinks in this area. From a scientific standpoint, this is a very serious problem. You've got water in these soils. They can take only so much water, and it upchucks. And it upchucks in an area to at least 150 feet in any direction. That has been a study from the University of Florida Department of Soil Science and Water Science. Now, whether anybody thinks that they're going to be able to overbuild in this area, in a hydric soil area, I mean, you are going to be in a lot of trouble here. That is for certain. I'll bet any money to my name for it.
Looks like that may be it.
An opportunity?
I'd like to thank you all for coming. I hope we answered your questions. I'm going to leave my business cards up in the front. If you'd like one, take one, and I'll stay around if you have any other questions. But thank you all again for coming.